Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Carly Perry. We talk about her decision to pursue a master's and a big old PhD in England, but she also shares about playing soccer in another country. And yes, she's converted to the European ways of calling it football, but I appreciate that. And then we go into how all these experiences in our lives, even the ones that seem the most difficult and challenging, are all still building blocks to help us become the person that we want to be. And it's happening without us even realizing it. So lots of interesting stuff and really great perspectives from the amazing Carly Perry, who has really gone through so much. So here is the rest of our conversation. So you graduate from American, and then what's your decision to pursue your master's? Like, what inspires you to do that?
So I saw a sports psychologist after my first ACL back in the day. And after that, I was like, that is what I want to do. So I basically I Googled my senior year at American, best sports psychology master's program in the world. Like, why did I do that? I don't know. I just wanted a list. And this school that I never heard of showed up. And I remember I always wanted to go to Denver because they have like quite a good applied sports psych program here. And then I was like, well, if I don't get into Denver, well, fuck, like I need a school. So I applied to this school, Loughborough University, and it's literally Loughborough University, #1 sports university in the world. That's like what it says. So I'm like, okay, right. I got into Loughborough like the day after I applied. And I was like, well, is this like a fake university? Like, what is going on? And I remember I went to visit Denver. So I have Denver and Loughborough lined up. Like, I got into Denver. I was so excited about that. And then I went and visited, and I was like, this is expensive. Mm-hmm. Living is expensive. Yeah. Why have I visited Denver so many times and never really loved it? So then I put all my eggs in the basket for Loughborough because I'm like, Denver is so expensive. I hope Loughborough is cool. Yeah. I get there and I'm like, God, it's not nice here. Like, it was raining and it was Easter break. So there was like no one around, and Loughborough's like a really small town. So I was like, oh God, I'm going to Denver. And I like put my money down for Denver. And I remember I started crying. And I was like, why are you so dramatic? Like, you have two options, like, you privileged loser. And then I was like, I don't want to go to Denver. Like, I want to go to England. I probably had like the most fun playing soccer doing my master's. Like, holy shit. I just got to play soccer like with people that just like to play. It was so fun.
What were, this is a loaded question, but like, what were some of the differences from playing in the U.S. compared to England?
I guess the culture is just completely different. Like the girls that attracts to the sport there, it's like really, really a different culture. They don't wear headbands when they play.
No pre-wrap?
No pre-wrap. No pre-wrap. I remember, oh my God, I had on like this Lululemon headband, right? And one of the girls was like, oh my God, your headband's so cool. Like, where'd you get it? And I was like, oh, it's Lululemon. And they were just dying. Like, they were like being so rude. So yeah. I actually just texted that girl the other day and I was like, I found one of my headbands, and she's like, burn it. So I like, hated it. Found it quite fun and like a really big community. I mean, football is the main sport there, so it's just exciting to play.
So finally you got that positive soccer experience again?
Yeah, and then tore my ACL in the middle of that season. But I was like, okay. Yeah. I just like finished this on such a high note.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I would have failed my master's, I think, if I didn't tear my ACL, because like if it was between doing an assignment or like going to a game, go play in a game, I would go play in the game. Because at that time I was on a futsal team, the university team, and a Premier League team.
Damn, doing the most.
Yeah, doing the most, so much that my body couldn't keep up.
Yeah, it was a surprise you tore it again.
I don't know what I was doing.
So your third ACL tear was when you were getting your master's. So basically your 5th year of college. And you're trying to go out on a high note, and then you're cursed with the ACL yet again. And so when that happened, were you like, okay, this has to be it. I got to be done.
Yeah, my brother was actually visiting me in Scotland, or we were in Scotland. That's where the game was. And he had taken the bus with the team, which is so fun. Like, can you imagine letting your siblings take like our college bus. Like that just wouldn't happen. So when I toured in Scotland, we had this whole trip planned. Like me and him were going to go to Paris, and I couldn't even walk to the train station. Like he had to give me a piggyback ride after the game. And I was like, holy shit, this is not fun. Like I am out. And then you just kind of think about like the bigger picture. And I'm like, I'm literally playing in England for fun. I didn't go to England to play soccer. I mean, it just ended up being something that I got to do. I was there to do a master's at the school because it was like the dream for what I wanted to do. And I just didn't have the time. That was more what it was. It's the therapy that I have to do before, like the prehab stuff. It's just too much time for like what gain? Like to play a sport that I might just step over a cone.
Yeah.
and get hurt.
How long did it take for you to get your master's?
A year, like it was a 12-month program.
You finish that up and you're just like, I want more. I want to do more.
Yeah, it's been a really weird transition into the PhD because of COVID stuff. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to do after the master's. Only because of the topic, because somebody sent me an advertisement and it was like PhD, women's professional football and mental health. And I was like, well, I couldn't have made a better title. Like that's exactly, I don't think I would have done a PhD just to do a PhD. But obviously the topic is quite appealing to me. So
yeah, that's awesome. So what's the name of the school you're at now?
University of Central Lancashire.
Lancashire.
Wow,
that is really cool. And I didn't realize how specific of a topic that is.
Yeah, so it's just for the Women's Super League too. So those will be like my participants. Yeah, so I'm like 8 months into that, just writing a paper on the mental health of female elite athletes right now.
How long is the program in total?
3 years.
Gotcha.
I think it will be a little bit longer with COVID stuff.
So what parts of this program really excite you to dig deeper in? Because I know the overarching theme is mental health and athletes, but like it's 3 years long of you just learning constantly. So what are some of the topics that like you really like to dig deep into?
To be honest, like my favorite topic that I looked at was in my master's. It was when I did ACL injury and eating disorders. And I found that really interesting and sad, to be honest. And I really hope that paper gets published. I need to talk to my supervisor because I don't think people realize the consequences of an ACL surgery beyond just, you only hear like the good story, like Rapinoe came back from 3 ACLs, but I'm like, well, literally, what is it, like 70% of girls, if they play over a certain amount of years, tear their ACL in America. Also, side note, I have a weird theory. They do not tear their ACL as much in England, and I think it's because I don't know what it is, but I need to figure it out someday. Because they were shocked when I tore my ACL. Like, they had never, I mean, obviously they know people that have, but on the club team I played, or the Premier League team, only one other girl had. Can you imagine that? Like, our college team, what?
It was 7. It was like 7 in my senior year. It was like you could field another team with the rate we were going at with ACL tears.
Yeah, so I don't know. I have a theory about that, but I just think like severe injury and mental health is really interesting because there's a physical element of actually like being taken out of sport along with like a mental aspect as well. It's not just like deselection in the sense that I know that's hard, like being deselected from a team, but you're also literally unable to do what you're able to do or want to do. So, but with the PhD program, basically it's kind of boring. It sounds way cooler than it is, but the whole first year is like research into what's been done. And so really what's been done is not a whole lot on women's soccer players or basketball or lacrosse or any sport with a ball, I would say. It's all on like gymnasts and eating disorders. Important, but like not quite holistically representative, I guess, of all of us. I mean, much more people play. There's a lot more girls playing ball sports. Like, that sounds funny, but like soccer, basketball and stuff. So like that's been interesting. There's really not a lot of research on it.
What's been the most surprising thing to you? Is it researching something and realizing, holy shit, I went through that? Or is there something else that's really been surprising to you that you've learned?
Oh, you know what's really surprising is how surprising people think this stuff is. I think like sometimes I have to like take myself back and be like, would I have known that if I didn't go through that? Because I remember bringing my supervisor some of the interviews, and he was like, oh my God, like these are really intense stories about ACL and eating disorders and such. And I was like, well, yeah, like, but I think it's been really surprising, not just with that, but like when I tell people what I'm doing in the research community, when they like ask you what you're doing for your PhD, they're like, wow, is that a thing? And I'm like, well, do you have physical health? Like mental health is clearly a thing.
Yeah.
I think it's more surprising to find out how many people are like unaware still that mental health is just a component of life.
So when people respond like that and they're so surprised, like, what is your response to them? How do you kind of explain it?
I usually am just like, yeah, it's in the general population. So athletes are just another part of the general population with different stressors.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't think people would be surprised if they're like, we're looking at mental health in women. You know what I mean? So, like, to say elite women athlete or female athletes, like, it's just a chunk of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's still the old narrative that athletes are strong and all of that, and I really forget that even exists. I just read a paper today on mental toughness, and they were using mental toughness and mental illness like interchangeably, and I'm like, oh wow, mental toughness, that doesn't mean that does not mean you're immune to getting mental illness, because I would say if like every elite athlete is resilient and mentally tough to get to where they are,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean that you don't have a chance of like having a mental health issue, Oh, I sound dorky.
No, this is so interesting to me because, I mean, to be honest, after talking to Dylan and then seeing the work you're doing, like, I see how I've been affected by this too, where like I won't eat a certain amount if I know I hadn't worked out that day, or knowing that I had a 2 a day, I can eat twice as much. Like that is something that I know I struggled through and still struggle today. Like I've always made a joke of like, oh, my career's over. I gotta learn how to eat like a human being now and not a freaking animal.
I almost called you to interview you because originally I was just doing severe injuries, and then because all the severe injuries happened to be ACL, I just decided to do ACL.
Yeah.
But like I do think that there's a whole spew of research that needs to just be done, because a lot of the girls I interviewed were your age and older, and they all had residual effects still from their injury on eating. Like, I don't know. It was just really sad. There was no one that didn't have an issue still with it in some capacity.
Because you're just taught, oh, you'll work it off. Like, you can eat this ice cream, you'll work it off. And so that's how my brain was wired is like, oh, you're right. Like, I have soccer practice later. Like, I can eat all of this. When maybe I wasn't even hungry, but like, I knew I was going to work out later. So I get to reward myself for that. But you don't lose that even when you grow into adulthood. Like, that stays with you.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think Dylan put in her article like fuel to perform, which was what me and her talked a lot about, and was a big like thing out of my project. Was we only like learn when we're younger to fuel for soccer practice. Like, oh, I got to eat some noodles because I have soccer, but like you actually just need to eat noodles because it's dinner time and your body needs some food. And like you do have soccer practice, so maybe have like a little bit more. But I think it's like a fundamental issue, or like it's like a big issue. I mean, that starts at a young age.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know what the answer is with it, but a lot of people maintain it. So do I. Like, oh, I need to eat this because I'm going to go work out. Like,
Or I worked out today, so I can eat this now.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I remember the conversation a lot of times when you're nearing your senior year and you're like, oh, I can't wait to be NARP skinny, like a non-athletic, regular person skinny, because you're like excited to lose muscle because we were just bulking up so much. We felt like we had these like terrible body image issues because we were just so muscular, but that was also so fit. Like we were in the best shape of our lives, but that was affecting us mentally.
Yeah. It's so bizarre. Like the fact that we were in a place where we felt like our body didn't fit into like society or something.
That's like such another huge issue, but I find that just really interesting. And it's one of those things that you recognize years later. You're like, oh, I thought I was just like really cautious of what I was eating. I was just being super healthy. It's like, no, I was over analyzing everything I was putting in my body.
I think teammates are so bad and so good for that. Like if you have a teammate who's like body positive and awesome, it can totally cultivate a good place. But like we did not have that.
Yeah, and it was just like a constant conversation, and we'd make jokes about it, like, "Oh, spring season, better throw out those jeans because you're not fitting in them, like leggings when we go out." But you look back on it, and you're like, these conversations were probably really damaging. So you have what, 2 years left? What do you want
Yeah.
to do with this big old PhD?
Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea. Like I guess I would love to become a sports psychologist, which is like another sort of training program that I have to go on. And I would love to be like hired on by a club in England and stay there, but it's obviously hard to stay there on like a work visa and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not like super in love with research right now. Like I don't, like I said, I wouldn't have picked research like a PhD unless it was this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't want to just be a researcher. Like I don't have a brain like that. I want to be with people.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's part of it, figuring it out along the way.
Yes. I
don't
love that
know.
you said that because that's the point of this whole podcast is it's okay if we don't have it all figured out because we are
Yeah.
raised to just have a plan and know exactly what we want to do, but I want to like make everyone aware that it's okay if you don't have it all figured out, and it's awesome that you're pursuing something and interested in something, but it's okay if you don't have like this 10-year plan.
No plan I ever made worked out. Like I literally never planned any of the things that happened, and I feel quite happy with where I ended up.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a game. You go into a game and you're like, well, I plan to win, but
Mhm.
like, okay, there's a lot of things that go into that and a lot of things that change. And I guess it's your decision at the end if it was like a win or not, which is different from a game.
So you say that anything you ever planned didn't really work out, so that probably was frustrating at the beginning when your plans never work out, but how do you feel about it now? Do you feel it's more, like you said, a game, it's a risk, you're excited to plan something because who knows what's going to come out of it?
I think sometimes you're like sometimes I stretch myself a little thin with being like, I don't have a plan, but let's go for my dream.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you have certain foundations in your life, like what you're going to be fine. You're going to fall back on it and be just fine. Like doing a PhD is a little bit out of my intelligence realm. On top of I had to move to a new city, on top of I didn't know anyone at the university, on top of my supervisors left. And so I kind of came home during COVID. This is just an example. And I was like, whoa. And you kind of just need to lean in on like the things that ground you during times of not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But the times of not knowing are when you actually find out so much more. Like just being home, I'm like, okay, let me regroup. Why am I doing this in the first place? And like, where can I go with this? Not where can't I go? Like, what's not working? And then if I think back about why I'm doing what I've done, every question you've asked me has come from a time when I thought I had nothing happening. Like I thought life was kind of shitty. Like I wanted to do a sports psych PhD because I saw a sports psych during like a horrible time in my life. And I want to do mental health because of a horrible time in my life.
I mean, that's so true. Like everything that we've talked about and that you've experienced have just been building blocks to where you're at now. When you like turn around, all of a sudden, 10 years later, you're like, oh my God, I've been like paving this path for myself all along that I didn't even realize I was on.
Yeah, I think sports are cool in that way, in the sense that you persevere, and it's not always fun, but like you persevere. But I just think on top of that, like the one thing that needs to change in like sporting culture and like retirement and transitions is just being able to talk about it. Like it was quite refreshing to hear you at the beginning of this call just be like, yeah, it's not been easy.
Going back to how we're just a continuing work in progress and you're never fully done with your journey, but what really brought you to a place of peace with your body image and your relationship with food?
Honestly, like we said, it doesn't really go away. Like I make way too many comments that I'm aware of where I'm like, why am I saying that? Who cares? And part of that's on me, part of it's on the society, but part of it is just it gets better with time. But I actually think this is really weird, but I stayed with a family during COVID and I was like forced to eat dinner with them every single night. And I was so grateful to be with a family and like during a time where I could have been stuck in my own in England. So obviously I happily ate their dinner every single night. And I think that that really changed to something where food became something I was like excited about more so, and like it became, so I guess it just wasn't about body image in the sense it was more controlling stuff. Like I liked to know how many calories I was eating and that kind of stuff. And like there's just bigger things. Like I was much more excited to be sitting with a family and having fun than worrying about the calories and the chili that I was eating. So I think sometimes I don't think there's like a moment when it goes away. Like, and I would never tell anybody that it will go away.
Mm-hmm.
Just like if you have an injury, it doesn't, you always have a scar or you always have a little niggle there.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's, you stop attending to it as much.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess body image wise, I also think that like doing what I'm doing, I'm like, well, I need to be in a good place. I don't really respect, I respect people's journeys with it, but I don't respect it when people are in a place of like really struggling and trying to force help other people. Like that's like,
Yeah.
no, I get it. Like we all do that, but I just think it's really hard for me to want to do what I'm going to do if I don't feel like I'm there myself.
Yeah, so not to get too deep, but after you've learned everything you've learned and experienced everything you've experienced, what would be your advice to, let's say, your 18-year-old self?
God. What would be yours? I want to hear your advice.
Don't lie to your parents, they're actually cooler than you think they are.
I I don't know, just like hang on. Like I just like that sounds really dumb, but like it will be fine. And just like shit, like miss the workout. Like just who cares sometimes. Um yeah. I feel like it's just like if you, I don't know, that's such a hard question. I honestly feel like it's just like hang on, like it's gonna be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I always say that to people, like you're doing fine. And it sounds dumb, but like genuinely capital FINE, you are doing fine. Like everything is fine. There's no one actually caring about how you're doing. You just need to be okay yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is no one actually cares that much about you. Like you have to stop thinking that everyone cares so much about what you look and what you're doing, what you're saying, because everyone's worrying about themselves just
Yeah.
as much as you're worrying about yourself. So I think it's taken me a long time to come to that realization. When I spend 45 minutes typing up an Instagram caption, I was like, well, what are they going to think if I say this? Like, literally everyone's scrolling. Like, no one gives a shit what your caption is. So I think that's great advice, is just realizing, like, come to terms with yourself because you're the one who's looking out for yourself at the end of the day.
You are stuck with yourself. Like my mom once said, you're your biggest project. And I was like, that is stupid. But like, she's kind of right. Like you're your own project. You're your own like project at the science fair. And no one gives a shit. No one's looking at your poster. It's literally just your own.
Yeah.
Like you're your own judge. Move on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a good way to end.
But hey.
That's deep. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to my conversation with Carly. I think she made some really interesting points, especially for athletes who have suffered major injuries or who are just struggling with the transition into, quote, normal people life. It's tough when you're so focused on one thing for so long, and especially with an injury, it's ripped away from you so quickly, and you got to figure out who you are in this world without your sport. So I really appreciate Carly's perspective, just focusing on the important things in life and giving yourself some grace if you don't want to do the workout, or if you have what you think is a cheat meal or something like that. As an athlete, it's hard to transition out of that mindset of being very strict in your workouts and diets, but I think it's important, especially in times like these, to not put so much pressure on ourselves. And like she said, we are doing capital FINE fine. Even though it might not seem like it in the world today, try to find some positivity, try to find something you're grateful for today. And I think that can really help us get through these tough times. So thank you so much, Carly, and thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. See you next time.